My name is Sloane Patterson. I'm 29, and I thought I knew my family. Last Saturday, I walked into my sister's wedding venue, expecting to celebrate her big day, only to discover my assigned seat wasn't at a table. It was a folding chair in the hallway. When I questioned the wedding planner, she nervously pointed to the seating chart where my name was scribbled in pencil at the bottom: Sloane. Hallway overflow. My future mother-in-law, Catherine, stood nearby with a satisfied smirk that made my blood run cold. That moment shattered everything I believed about family loyalty and set off a chain of discoveries that would expose decades of manipulation and ultimately destroy the perfect facade my family had built. Hey everyone, before we dive into this absolutely wild family drama, I want to know, where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below. If this story hooks you like it hooked everyone on Reddit, smash that like button and hit subscribe, because trust me, this revenge tale gets more twisted than you can imagine. The karma that comes from my manipulative family will leave you speechless, so buckle up for this emotional roller coaster. Growing up, Emma was always the golden child. 3 years younger than me, she possessed an effortless charm that made everyone gravitate toward her. Where I was bookish and introverted, Emma was vivacious and popular. Where I struggled with acne and braces, Emma glided through adolescence with flawless skin and a perfect smile. Our parents, David and Linda Patterson, never tried to hide their favoritism. Emma's achievements were celebrated with family dinners and photo albums, while mine were met with polite acknowledgement and quick subject changes. When Emma announced her engagement to Marcus, a successful investment banker from old money, our family treated it like a royal wedding announcement. Suddenly, our modest suburban home became wedding planning central. Mom took a leave of absence from her teaching job to help Emma plan every detail. Dad opened his carefully guarded savings account without question. Even our grandmother, who'd always been notoriously tight with money, offered to pay for Emma's dress from the exclusive boutique downtown. I tried to be supportive, offering to help with invitations, decoration planning, and vendor coordination, but every suggestion I made was politely dismissed. "Oh, Sloane, that's so thoughtful, but we've already handled that," became Emma's standard response. When I offered to throw her bachelorette party, she informed me that Marcus's sister had already organized something at a spa resort in Napa Valley. When I suggested helping with the rehearsal dinner, she explained that Marcus's family was taking care of all the events. The exclusion stung, but I attributed it to Emma's perfectionist nature and the stress of planning such an elaborate event. I convinced myself that my family wasn't intentionally pushing me aside. They were just caught up in the excitement. I buried my hurt feelings and focused on finding the perfect maid of honor speech, assuming I'd been chosen for that role since I was her only sister. 3 weeks before the wedding, Emma dropped by my apartment unexpectedly. I was thrilled, thinking she finally wanted to include me in the planning, or maybe just spend some quality sister time together. Instead, she sat on my couch with an uncomfortable expression and delivered news that felt like a physical blow. "Sloane, I need to tell you something about the wedding," she began, avoiding eye contact. "Marcus's sister Olivia is going to be my maid of honor. I know we never officially discussed it, but his family felt it would be better for building relationships between our families." I sat in stunned silence, processing her words. "What am I then?" I finally managed to ask. "You're still in the wedding party," she said quickly. "You'll be a bridesmaid, of course. Olivia just has more experience with these kinds of events, and Marcus's family has some specific traditions they want to incorporate." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, but I barely heard the details. Something about color schemes, vendor preferences, and family dynamics. All I could focus on was the realization that I'd been demoted in my own sister's wedding to accommodate people who'd known her for less than 2 years. As Emma left that evening, she hugged me tightly and whispered, "I'm so glad you understand." This doesn't change anything between us. But everything had already changed. I just didn't realize how much worse it would get. The final weeks leading up to the wedding became a blur of last-minute fittings, rehearsals I wasn't invited to, and family conversations that stopped when I entered the room. I started noticing how my parents spoke differently about the wedding when they thought I wasn't listening, discussing details and decisions I knew nothing about, mentioning events and meetings I hadn't been included in. The night before the wedding, at the rehearsal dinner I'd assumed I'd attend, I sat at home alone, ordering takeout and wondering how I'd become such an outsider in my own family. My phone buzzed occasionally with photos from the dinner. My parents laughing with Marcus's family, Emma glowing in a white rehearsal dress I'd never seen. Everyone toasting the happy couple while I sat in my empty apartment. The morning of the wedding, I arrived early at the venue to help with any last-minute preparations, still clinging to the hope that my family would need me for something important. The botanical garden venue was stunning. Exactly the kind of elegant, romantic setting Emma had always dreamed about. White roses and eucalyptus garlands draped every surface, and crystal chandeliers hung from the reception tent like captured starlight. I found my mom in the bridal suite steaming Emma's dress with the focused intensity of a surgeon. When I offered to help, she barely looked up. "Everything's under control, honey. Why don't you go get ready? The ceremony starts in 3 hours." In the bridesmaids' preparation room, I met Marcus's sister Olivia for the first time. She was everything I'd expected. Tall, blonde, impeccably dressed, and radiating the kind of confidence that comes from never doubting your place in the world. She greeted me with a perfectly practiced smile and immediately began directing the other bridesmaids through hair and makeup schedules. "Sloan Wright," she said, consulting a detailed timeline on her phone. "You're scheduled for hair at noon and makeup at 1. That should give you plenty of time before pictures." I nodded, grateful to finally have a clear role in the day's events. But as the morning progressed, I noticed subtle slights that made my stomach churn. The other bridesmaids received personalized gift bags with monogrammed robes and jewelry for the ceremony. I received a generic bag with a drugstore lipstick and a thank you note that looked like it had been written in a hurry. During the group photos, I was consistently positioned at the edge of every shot, half hidden behind other people or cut off entirely. When I mentioned it to the photographer, he shrugged apologetically and said he was following specific instructions about positioning and composition. The most painful moment came during the private family photos. As we gathered for what I assumed would be immediate family portraits, Marcus's mother, Catherine, approached my parents with a concerned expression. "I hate to bring this up," she said in a voice loud enough for everyone to hear, "but we're running behind schedule and the photographer mentioned we need to prioritize the most important family combinations. Perhaps we could do the core family shots first and then add extended family if time permits." My parents nodded immediately, and I watched in horror as they arranged themselves with Emma and Marcus for photos that clearly didn't include me. When I started to join the group, Catherine gently placed a hand on my arm. "Oh, sweetie, let's let them get their immediate shots first. We'll make sure to get some lovely pictures with you later." Her smile was warm and maternal, but her eyes were calculating. I stood there surrounded by wedding chaos, finally understanding that I wasn't being accidentally excluded. I was being deliberately erased. This wasn't about wedding stress or logistics. Someone had made conscious decisions to minimize my presence in my own sister's most important day. The seating chart discovery came next, and it confirmed my worst fears. I wasn't just being marginalized. I was being hidden away, entirely placed where arriving guests couldn't see me, where I couldn't participate in the celebration, where I might as well not have existed at all. But it was Catherine's smirk that ignited something inside me. That expression of satisfaction of a plan perfectly executed, told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't Emma's idea. This was orchestration, manipulation, and control from someone who had decided I didn't belong in this family narrative. Standing in that hallway, holding my purse and staring at a folding chair that represented my family's true feelings about me, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to quietly accept this humiliation. I was going to find out exactly who was behind this systematic exclusion and why they thought they could treat me like I didn't matter. I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures. The seating chart with my name scribbled at the bottom, the hallway chair, Catherine's satisfied expression as she directed traffic around the reception area. I had no plan yet, but I knew I needed evidence of what was happening. Instead of taking my assigned hallway seat, I quietly slipped out of the venue and sat in my car, hands shaking as I processed the magnitude of what had just happened. My entire family had participated in this humiliation, and I needed to understand why. I called my best friend Jessica, who'd known my family for over a decade. "Jess, I need you to think carefully about something I said," when she answered. "Have you ever noticed my family treating me differently than Emma? I mean, really noticed, not just typical sibling favoritism?" There was a long pause before she responded. "Sloan, I've been waiting years for you to ask me that question. Yes, I've noticed. I've wanted to say something so many times, but I didn't want to hurt you or cause family drama." Over the next hour, Jessica painted a picture I'd been too close to see clearly. She recalled family barbecues where my achievements were barely mentioned, while Emma's were celebrated extensively. She remembered graduation parties where I was expected to help serve while Emma was the center of attention. She described subtle comments from my parents about my choices, my appearance, my career, and my relationships that had made her uncomfortable, but that I'd internalized as normal family dynamics. "The worst part," Jessica said gently, "was watching you make excuses for them. You'd explain away every slight, every exclusion, every moment when they chose Emma over you. I wanted to shake you and make you see what was happening, but you seemed so determined to believe they loved you equally." After hanging up with Jessica, I sat in the parking lot and forced myself to remember other moments with new clarity. My college graduation, where my parents arrived late and left early because Emma had a high school theater performance the same evening. My 25th birthday party, which was canceled last minute because Emma needed help moving apartments. The family vacation to Europe that was planned around Emma's schedule and interests, with no consideration for my preferences or availability. The patterns had always been there. I'd just been too invested in maintaining the illusion of a loving family to acknowledge them. But the wedding situation felt different. This wasn't just favoritism. This was deliberate cruelty. Someone had actively planned to humiliate me, and I suspected Catherine was the architect. I needed to understand her motivation and gather evidence of what was really happening. I drove home and spent the rest of the evening researching everything I could find about Marcus's family. Their social media profiles revealed a world of exclusive events, charity galas, and carefully curated family presentations. Catherine's LinkedIn showed her involvement in several high society organizations and her role as a family reputation consultant for wealthy clients. The more I learned, the clearer the picture became. Catherine wasn't just protective of her son. She was obsessed with social status and family image. Marcus marrying into a middle-class family was already a compromise for her. Having a sister-in-law who didn't fit her vision of acceptable family members was probably seen as a liability that needed to be managed. I started documenting everything. I created a timeline of exclusions and slights, saved screenshots of social media posts that showed family events I hadn't been invited to, and began reaching out to extended family members to gather more information. My cousin Rachel, who lived across the country, was particularly enlightening during our phone call. Sloan, I'm so glad you called. I've been worried about the family dynamics for years. Do you remember Uncle Tom's funeral last year? I tried to include you in the family coordination, but your mom kept redirecting everything through Emma. She said you were too emotional to handle funeral logistics, but you seemed perfectly fine to me. These conversations revealed a pattern of my family systematically undermining my credibility and competence while elevating Emma's role in every situation. They'd been conditioning extended family, friends, and even strangers to see me as the unreliable sister, the one who couldn't be trusted with important responsibilities. As the weekend progressed, I received exactly 3 text messages about the wedding. One from my mom asking if I'd gotten home safely, sent at 11 p.m., clearly an afterthought. One from Emma thanking me for being such a good sport about everything and promising we'd catch up soon. And one from my dad with a group photo from the reception that had somehow been cropped to exclude me entirely. No one apologized. No one acknowledged what had happened. No one seemed to think there was anything wrong with seating a family member in a hallway while strangers enjoyed prime reception tables. The silence was almost more devastating than the original humiliation. It confirmed that my family saw nothing inappropriate about their treatment of me, which meant this behavior would continue indefinitely unless I took action to change it. That's when I decided I wouldn't be the victim of their manipulations anymore. If they wanted to play games with family loyalty and respect, I was going to learn the rules and play to win. But first, I needed to understand exactly how deep this conspiracy went and who else was involved in the systematic campaign to erase me from my own family. This wasn't just about a wedding anymore. This was about years of psychological manipulation that had convinced my family I was worth less than their social aspirations. And if exposing the truth meant burning down the perfect facade they'd built, so be it. Some things matter more than keeping the peace, and my dignity was one of them. Monday morning, I took a personal day from work and began my investigation in earnest. If my family was going to treat me like an outsider, I'd use that position to my advantage and observe them like the strangers they'd revealed themselves to be. I started with social media archaeology, going back through years of family photos and posts. The patterns were striking once I knew what to look for. In group photos, I was consistently placed at edges where I could be easily cropped out. In family celebration posts, my achievements were mentioned briefly while Emma's were detailed extensively. Comments from family friends showed a clear preference for Emma, with responses like, "Emma is such a treasure," and "You must be so proud of your daughter." Singular, not daughters. The most revealing discovery came from my mom's Facebook memories. A post from my college graduation read, "So proud of both our girls today." Sloan graduated with honors from State University, and Emma got accepted to her dream internship program. Even on my graduation day, Emma's future accomplishment shared equal billing with my actual achievement. But it was my investigation into Catherine's background that revealed the true scope of what I was dealing with. Through professional networks and social connections, I learned that Catherine had a reputation for managing family situations that didn't align with her social aspirations. A former colleague told me about Catherine's previous daughter-in-law, Marcus's brother's ex-wife, who'd been similarly marginalized until she eventually divorced and moved across the country. "Catherine has this way of making people feel like they're not good enough," the colleague explained. "She's subtle about it, never directly confrontational, but she systematically undermines anyone who threatens her vision of family perfection. She did it to Rachel, Marcus's brother's ex, and apparently she's been working on your family situation for months." This revelation hit me like a physical blow. Catherine hadn't just decided to humiliate me at the wedding. She'd been orchestrating my exclusion from the beginning, slowly convincing my family that I was a liability to their new elevated social status. I called Emma's former roommate, hoping to get insight into when this campaign had started. What I learned was devastating. According to Sarah, Catherine had been expressing concerns about family dynamics since Emma and Marcus's third date. Emma would come home from dinners with Marcus's family talking about how sophisticated they were and how she needed to elevate her presentation, Sarah told me. She started criticizing things about your family's lifestyle, your parents' jobs, even your apartment. It was like she was seeing everything through Catherine's eyes and finding it lacking. The manipulation had been slow and insidious. Catherine had convinced Emma that association with my middle-class mediocrity would reflect poorly on her new social position. She'd suggested that family events should focus on putting the best foot forward and making appropriate impressions. Over time, these conversations had transformed my loving sister into someone who saw me as an embarrassment to be managed rather than a family member to be cherished. My parents had been equally susceptible to Catherine's influence. Dad, who'd always been insecure about our family's modest means, was thrilled to be connected to Marcus's wealthy family. Mom, who'd spent years worrying about Emma's future, was grateful to Catherine for taking Emma under her wing and teaching her sophisticated social skills. They'd all been so seduced by the promise of elevated status that they'd willingly sacrificed me to maintain Catherine's approval. I wasn't just being excluded. I was being offered up as proof of their commitment to their new social aspirations. The evidence was overwhelming, but I needed something concrete, something undeniable that would expose the manipulation for what it really was. That's when I remembered the wedding planning meetings that had happened at my parents' house. Meetings I'd been excluded from, but that might have been recorded in some way. I called my mom under the pretense of helping clean up post-wedding chaos. When I arrived at the house, I offered to organize the wedding planning materials scattered around the dining room. Among the vendor contracts, seating charts, and timeline documents, I found Catherine's handwritten notes from various planning meetings. The notes were a roadmap of calculated exclusion. Minimize Sloane's visibility during ceremony. Seat Sloane away from main reception area. Limit Sloane's role in photos to prevent future awkwardness. Suggest casual dress code for Sloane to maintain visual hierarchy. But the most damning evidence was a text message thread I discovered when my mom asked me to help organize her photos on her iPad. She'd forgotten to delete a group chat between herself, Emma, and Catherine titled Wedding Logistics. The messages revealed months of coordination designed specifically to minimize my presence and importance. Catherine, we want Emma's day to reflect her new status. Having Sloane too prominent in photos might send mixed messages to our social circle. Emma, I understand, but she's still my sister. I don't want to hurt her feelings. Catherine, of course not, dear. We'll handle this sensitively. She'll still be included, just in a way that works better for everyone. Mom, whatever you think is best. You know more about these formal events than we do. The thread continued for weeks, with Catherine systematically convincing my mother and sister that excluding me was actually a kindness, that I wouldn't be comfortable in such a formal setting, that I'd prefer a quieter role, that I'd appreciate not having the pressure of major responsibilities. They'd even discussed my outfit with Catherine, suggesting I be told the dress code was casual elegance, while everyone else wore formal attire. The goal was to ensure I looked underdressed and out of place, reinforcing the narrative that I didn't belong in their elevated social circle. Reading those messages felt like watching my family's love for me disappear in real time, replaced by calculated cruelty disguised as consideration. Catherine had weaponized their insecurities and social aspirations against me, and they'd eagerly participated in my systematic dehumanization. Armed with screenshots, documented evidence, and a clear understanding of the conspiracy against me, I knew I had to act strategically. Catherine had spent months manipulating my family with subtle psychological warfare. If I wanted justice, I needed to use her own tactics against her. The key insight came from studying Catherine's social media presence and professional reputation. She'd built her identity around being a family harmony expert, someone who helped wealthy families navigate complex social situations with grace and dignity. Her LinkedIn featured testimonials about her ability to maintain family unity while preserving social standards and resolve delicate family dynamics with sensitivity and wisdom. Catherine's reputation was her most valuable asset, and it was also her greatest vulnerability. If I could expose her manipulation tactics publicly, particularly in the social circles she cared most about, the damage to her credibility would be devastating. I started by creating a detailed documentation package. Screenshots of the planning messages, photos of the seating chart with my name scribbled in pencil, pictures of my hallway chair juxtaposed with the elegant reception seating. I wrote a timeline of exclusions and manipulations complete with dates, witnesses, and evidence. But I knew that simply posting this online would make me look like a vindictive family member airing dirty laundry. I needed a platform that would give my story credibility and reach the audience that mattered most to Catherine. That's when I remembered Marcus's cousin David, who worked as a journalist for a society magazine that covered high-end weddings and social events. I'd met him briefly at Emma and Marcus's engagement party, and he'd seemed genuinely kind and approachable. More importantly, he'd mentioned being interested in stories about authentic family dynamics versus social media presentations. I reached out to David, carefully presenting my story not as family drama but as a case study in social manipulation and the psychological cost of status obsession. I shared my documentation and explained how Catherine's tactics represented a broader pattern of wealthy families using emotional abuse to maintain social hierarchies. David was immediately interested not just in the personal story but in the sociological implications. This kind of systematic family manipulation is more common than people realize, he told me during our initial conversation. Wealthy families often employ these tactics to maintain social position, but it's rarely documented so thoroughly. Your evidence is extraordinary. We spent several weeks developing the story, fact-checking details, and reaching out to other family members for additional perspectives. David contacted the former daughter-in-law who'd been similarly targeted, and she provided corroborating evidence of Catherine's manipulation tactics in previous family situations. The article wouldn't just expose what had happened to me. It would reveal Catherine's pattern of behavior and its impact on multiple families. David framed it as an investigation into social climbing, family dynamics, and the psychological warfare used to maintain artificial hierarchies. But I wasn't content with just public exposure. I wanted Catherine to experience the same systematic exclusion and humiliation she'd orchestrated for me. So I began implementing a more targeted campaign. I created a detailed dossier about Catherine's manipulation tactics and shared it strategically with key members of her social circle. I reached out to board members of the charitable organizations where she held leadership positions, sharing documentation of her behavior as evidence of her true character versus her public persona. I contacted the family reputation consulting firm where she worked, providing evidence that her methods included psychological manipulation and emotional abuse disguised as family harmony management. Her professional methodology, when exposed in detail, revealed itself as a blueprint for systematic bullying. Most importantly, I began building alliances within Marcus's extended family. Several cousins and family friends had always felt uncomfortable with Catherine's controlling behavior but had never seen clear evidence of her tactics. My documentation provided validation for their instincts and gave them concrete examples to share with other family members. The beauty of this approach was that Catherine couldn't defend herself without admitting to the behavior. Any attempt to minimize or justify her actions would only reinforce the evidence of her manipulation. She was trapped by her own tactics, facing the same kind of systematic isolation she'd created for others. I also knew that Emma and my parents would eventually have to confront the reality of what they'd participated in. The public exposure would force them to choose between continuing to enable Catherine's behavior or acknowledging their role in my systematic exclusion. As I prepared to execute this plan, I felt a strange mix of excitement and sadness. I was finally taking control of a situation that had made me feel powerless for months, but I was also acknowledging that my family relationships might never recover from this confrontation. The naive part of me hoped that exposing the manipulation would lead to apologies, reconciliation, and genuine family healing. But the realistic part of me understood that some people choose to double down on bad behavior rather than admit they were wrong. Either way, I was done being the family scapegoat. If they wanted to exclude me, they'd learn that exclusion worked both ways. And if Catherine wanted to play power games with family dynamics, she was about to discover that she'd picked the wrong target. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Use Catherine's own social circles and professional reputation to hold her accountable for behavior she'd never expected to be documented or exposed. Let her experience the isolation and humiliation she'd so carefully orchestrated for others. Show my family the true cost of their complicity in her psychological warfare. Justice wasn't just about revenge. It was about breaking the cycle of manipulation and ensuring that Catherine could never systematically destroy another family member's sense of belonging and worth. 3 weeks after I'd set my plan in motion, the consequences began cascading exactly as I'd hoped. David's article, titled "The Hidden Cost of Social Climbing When Family Loyalty Becomes Family Warfare," was published in the magazine's digital edition and quickly went viral across social media platforms. The piece masterfully avoided naming specific individuals while providing enough identifying details that anyone in Catherine's social circle could recognize the story. The documentation was presented as a case study in psychological manipulation, complete with expert commentary from family therapists about the long-term damage of systematic exclusion and emotional abuse. Within 48 hours, the article had been shared thousands of times, with readers commenting about their own experiences with manipulative family members and social climbers. Several prominent society bloggers picked up the story, using it as a launching point for discussions about authenticity versus artificial social hierarchies. But the most satisfying response came from Catherine's professional network. The family reputation consulting firm where she worked received multiple inquiries from potential clients who'd read the article and recognized the described tactics. Several asked specifically whether these methods were standard practice and whether clients should be concerned about psychological manipulation disguised as family harmony management. Catherine's LinkedIn profile, which had once showcased glowing testimonials about her family mediation skills, suddenly featured a comments section filled with people questioning her methods and ethics. Professional colleagues who'd once viewed her as an expert in delicate family situations now saw her as someone who weaponized psychology for social advancement. The charitable organizations where Catherine held board positions received copies of my documentation package from concerned donors who questioned whether someone capable of systematic family manipulation should be representing. Institutions focused on community welfare and ethical leadership. Most devastating to Catherine's reputation was the response from Marcus's extended family. Several cousins reached out to me directly, sharing their own stories of feeling uncomfortable with Catherine's controlling behavior but never having concrete evidence to address it. My documentation gave them the validation and tools they needed to confront her influence within their family dynamic. Marcus's brother, whose ex-wife had been similarly targeted, was particularly supportive. He called me to apologize for not intervening sooner and to share additional evidence of Catherine's manipulation tactics that I could use if needed. I watched her destroy my marriage, he told me. I should have said something when I saw her starting the same pattern with your family. The professional consequences were swift and decisive. Catherine's consulting firm quietly removed her from client-facing roles, citing concerns about methodological alignment with company values. Her charitable board positions began disappearing as organizations distanced themselves from the controversy. Her social media presence, once carefully curated to showcase her family expertise, went silent as she struggled to manage the fallout. But the most profound impact was on my own family relationships. Emma called me 4 days after the article was published, sobbing with what seemed like genuine remorse. "Sloan, I had no idea how bad it looked from the outside," she said through tears. "Reading that article felt like seeing our family through a stranger's eyes, and I was horrified. I thought Catherine was helping me navigate Marcus's family expectations, but I can see now that she was manipulating all of us." Emma's apology felt sincere, but it was accompanied by requests that I help repair the family situation and find a way to move forward without more public drama. She was still more concerned about managing consequences than addressing the underlying behavior that had caused the problem. My parents' response was more complicated. Dad called to express concern about the family embarrassment and suggested I should have handled this privately instead of airing our business publicly. He seemed to view my documentation of their behavior as the real problem, not the behavior itself. Mom's reaction was more emotionally complex. She alternated between defensive justifications of her actions and tearful apologies for getting caught up in wedding stress. But even her apologies focused more on her intentions than on the impact of her choices. She wanted forgiveness without having to fully acknowledge the systematic nature of my exclusion. The most revealing conversation came when Marcus called me directly. "Sloan, I owe you an enormous apology," he said. "I've been watching my mother manipulate family situations my entire life, but I thought Emma's family was different, that you all genuinely preferred her to take the lead on everything. I should have recognized the pattern and intervened." Marcus's acknowledgement meant more to me than my family's defensive apologies because it came from someone who understood Catherine's tactics intimately and could see how effectively she deployed them against us. He also shared information that explained some of Catherine's motivation. Apparently, she'd been pressuring Marcus to consider whether our family's social limitations might impact his career advancement in certain circles. She'd convinced herself that distancing Marcus from my middle-class influence was protecting his professional future. The irony, Marcus told me, is that my colleagues and friends are more impressed by authentic family loyalty than by manufactured social presentations. Catherine's manipulations actually made our family look worse, not better. 6 months later, the long-term consequences of my documentation have reshaped our entire family dynamic. Catherine's influence over my parents has evaporated as they've realized how her guidance systematically damaged their relationship with me. Emma and Marcus have established clear boundaries with Catherine, limiting her involvement in their marriage and future family decisions. Catherine herself has largely withdrawn from family interactions, apparently recognizing that her manipulation tactics are no longer effective now that they've been exposed and documented. She's focused on rebuilding her professional reputation, but the damage to her credibility in our social circles appears to be permanent. My relationship with my family is slowly rebuilding, but it's based on new terms. I've made it clear that I won't tolerate being treated as a second-class family member, and I've established consequences for any future exclusion or manipulation. Some family traditions have changed as a result, but the changes feel healthier and more authentic. The most unexpected outcome has been the response from complete strangers who've reached out after reading the article or seeing social media discussions about family manipulation. Dozens of people have shared their own stories of being systematically excluded or emotionally abused by family members who use social status, financial control, or psychological manipulation to maintain power. These conversations have convinced me that Catherine's tactics aren't unusual. They're just rarely documented with the kind of evidence that makes the pattern undeniable. Many families enable this kind of behavior because it's easier to sacrifice one member than to confront a manipulator who provides social or financial benefits. Looking back, I realize that my decision to document and expose Catherine's manipulation wasn't just about getting justice for myself. It was about breaking a cycle of psychological abuse that would have continued affecting my family and others for years to come. Catherine had counted on my family's complicity and my own silence to maintain her power. By refusing to accept the role of family scapegoat and by methodically documenting her tactics, I removed her ability to operate in the shadows where manipulation thrives. The hallway chair at Emma's wedding was meant to be a symbol of my irrelevance and exclusion. Instead, it became the catalyst for exposing systematic family abuse and holding everyone involved accountable for their choices. Now, when I attend family events, I have a seat at the table. Not because someone graciously allowed it, but because I've established that my presence and dignity are non-negotiable. And if anyone tries to manipulate family dynamics again, they know there will be immediate and lasting consequences. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's refusing to be invisible and demanding the respect you've always deserved. The karma didn't just come for Catherine. It came for everyone who chose convenience over conscience and status over family loyalty. So here's my question for all of you watching. Have you ever experienced this kind of systematic family manipulation? Have you seen someone use social status or family events to control and exclude people? How do you think families should handle situations where one member is systematically undermining others for personal gain? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real stories about family drama and justice served. Share this video with anyone who might need to hear that they don't have to accept being treated as invisible or unworthy by their own family. Thank you so much for watching and for all your support. Remember, you deserve to be treated with respect and dignity, especially by the people who claim to love you. Sometimes standing up for yourself means risking relationships, but it also means protecting your self-worth and potentially helping others who are facing similar situations. Until next time, keep fighting for your worth, and never let anyone convince you that you don't deserve a seat at your own family's table. The best revenge against manipulators is refusing to play their games and demanding the respect you've always deserved.